All right. Hello, everybody, again. This is Rihanna, the Communications Coordinator at Young Invincibles. Welcome to the Women's Advocacy Training. We're super excited to be here and to be talking to you about the importance of sharing your story and your voice with legislators, your peers, and the media. So we're going to go ahead and get started. All right, so our first presenter is going to be Jessie Ryan, the Associate Director of the Campaign for College Opportunity. Jessie grew up in the Central Valley and was raised by a struggling single mother. While her life was often challenging, Jessie's mother taught that being an economically disadvantaged did not mean a lifetime of disadvantage. She instilled the belief in Jessie that through education and civic participation, individuals could vastly improve their quality of life. It was her mother's strong sense of civic service and empathy for others that inspired Jessie to seek a college education, something her mother had always dreamed of doing, and devote much of her professional life to making it possible for others to follow their same college dream. As the Associate Director for the Campaign for College Opportunity, Jessie leads the organization's advocacy and policy efforts to increase the number of California students accessing higher education and impact the rate that students succeed in reaching their educational goals. As a proud product of the California Community College and California State University systems, last year Jessie was thrilled to shepherd historic transfer reform legislation to simplify the transfer pathway from community colleges to four-year universities. So welcome, Jessie, and why don't you take it away?
Good morning. So as was shared, I am a daughter of the Central Valley. I'm a wife, I'm an adoptive mother, I'm an activist, and I consider myself a change agent. And I truly believe that good advocacy can transform people's lives. And I also believe that women have an invaluable story to tell. So I have the pleasure this morning of talking to you about why advocacy is important, how to talk to legislators, and some tips and tricks for being really effective as that agent of change in the advocacy arena. I'm going to start by just talking about why advocacy is important, because sometimes this feels like a very precarious idea. Advocacy is important because it can change societal misconceptions. It can shape decision makers' beliefs, and it can influence attitudes. Beyond that, women are powerful advocates, largely because in male-dominated politics, we bring a truth that would be otherwise missing. I think that's important. Our truth would be otherwise missing from the dialogue. We have to be empowered to own that truth. So as was shared, I was practically born doing advocacy. I grew up in the Central Valley. I moved around 8 different times between kindergarten and 6th grade just to keep a roof over our head and food on the table. But what I learned at a very young age was how to navigate the system. And I also learned from my struggling single mother that it wasn't enough to just be out there navigating the system, but I had to, as a way of getting out of poverty, get a higher education and then commit myself to social service, or I wasn't going to make the path smoother for those that followed me. So I was very fortunate at a young age to campaign alongside my mother for city council races, for presidential races, and in fact, one of my earliest memories was of accompanying my mom to see Geraldine Ferraro speak as she was running for vice president. I was only 4 years old, and my mother lifted me on top of her shoulders and said, "Look at that woman. If she can run for vice president, then you can be anything you want to be in the world." But flash forward 30 years, and we still haven't had either a female vice president or a president. And yet we as women make up more than half the population and have a critical perspective that no one else can bring to the table. I believe in the power of personal narrative. I believe that this personal narrative and connecting to the story is really what allows us to transform society. One of the things that I like to share with women who are entering the advocacy arena is this idea of Sankofa, which is we have to be able to look back so we can move forward. If we're going to move forward, we as women must understand why and how we came to be what we are today. This is really what I call the roots of our advocacy roots, the connection to the issues that allow us to be an informed and powerful voice when we're advocating for policy change at a local or a state level. If you haven't already taken the time to write down your story and look for where and how it connects to the advocacy work that you choose to do, I really encourage you to do it. Because when you take a look at how your life experiences have shaped your beliefs and the things that you care deeply about, it really allows you to be a voice for change that you wouldn't be able to do if you haven't done that hard work of self-reflection. So I want to talk a bit about how to be an effective advocate, because I'm asked a lot about how you navigate the shark-infested waters of Sacramento. And in full disclosure, I didn't believe that this is where I would end up. When I graduated from college, I went to work in a nonprofit. I did several years of community organizing across a 21-county region in the state, and I really believed in the power to do local advocacy to affect social change. But this idea of trying to penetrate the Sacramento political arena was terrifying. I felt like such an outsider. And so when I moved to Sacramento in 2009, I was unsure of how my voice would be heard, how I would be received, and how I could be effective as an advocate in that arena. I'm really happy to say that I was able to move beyond that and to accomplish some great things, and I learned some really good lessons along the way. So I'm going to go ahead and share those with you, and there'll be an opportunity later on in the call to ask questions if you want to explore some of these ideas further. One of the first things I always tell young women and girls who are trying to become advocates and influence state policy is you have to connect your community service to your politics. I find that women are quite often the fabric of their local communities, involved in schools, involved in community issues, volunteering as really incredible resources on every front. But they don't necessarily see the connection to state-level policy. And believe me, there is a connection, because when we identify local issues and then understand the state policy process, that's when we can really affect social change. So let go of your fears and really commit yourself to taking on something that's greater than you and advocating for the state-level scalable changes that can make a difference for so many people in local communities. So that's the first thing that I always say. And then also do your homework. I will tell you, it's astonishing to me when I do trainings, when I ask people in the room, how many of you know your local assembly member, your local senator, even who they are? How many of you have met with them? They are often your greatest resource. Even when you don't necessarily see eye to eye, philosophically, you need to know where your sources of power are and how you can go to them. So do your homework, find out who represents you, and try and establish a relationship so that you have a line of contact, because your voice is an important voice when that decision maker is trying to press policy forward. When you're doing your advocacy, always make sure that you tell the truth, and that is, truth about your personal history, but also truth about the data or the statistics that you're using to help push the policy reforms. I always say, fourth, you have to be gracious. It's amazing. There are so many individuals who are working in district offices or state offices that are really the backbones of the work. And yet they often aren't treated well, because individuals who are going to meet with a member are looking at that member, he or she, as being the person that they really need to talk to, not recognizing that that secretary, that leg aide, that person who is the front point of contact is often the gatekeeper that can make those meetings happen. When you establish a relationship with those individuals, you're going to have a much better opportunity to get to the decision makers as well. Be gracious, thank them for their time. Learn the process. This is something that can be scary for people who haven't done advocacy at a state level, but process equals power. Remember that. Process equals power. If you understand how a bill becomes a law, and there's a great how a bill becomes a law one-page document that everybody should have on their desk, then you'll know what your points of influence are, what the calendar looks like, where you can have impact. This is a very important point, because if you're going to be influential, then you have to have a seat at the table. Everybody's heard, if you're not at the table, then you're on the menu. Remember that. Learn the process. Keep it simple. Know what you're trying to accomplish. If you're going to accomplish one or two things, make sure that you figure out a way to explain it in a way that's relevant, that is real, and is actionable. Also, know your non-negotiables. And this is a really hard thing for women often to come to grips with. We have to know where we're willing to find compromise, but also when we're willing to walk away, because the bottom line is we can't compromise at a certain level, and it's non-negotiable to the work that we're hoping to do. Find that cutoff point, that line in the sand, and articulate it beforehand so that when you're going into these meetings, you can walk away if you need to. But beyond that, don't be afraid to negotiate. And this is one of the things that I always encourage women and girls that I'm talking to that are entering this policy advocacy arena. You know, we as women, it's well documented, often struggle with negotiating. We struggle because we're afraid that if we ask for too much or negotiate, we won't be liked, we'll be seen as abrasive. But the truth of the matter is, when we're dealing in the world of social change and activism, it's bigger than us. It doesn't matter if we're liked. It doesn't matter if we're seen as abrasive. You know, we want to try and exert diplomacy and graciousness, but also be willing to have those uncomfortable conversations and let it pull out a little bit longer if it means that it's going to help us yield to a better outcome. I can't tell you the numbers of times I've had better results by just allowing those uncomfortable and sometimes heated conversations to occur. Build relationships and value those relationships, from the person that is sweeping the floors in the steps of the state capitol to the individual who's the chief of staff. You never know when your paths will come in contact, and also when they can be helpful. But beyond that, it's always really important to know that today's enemies might be tomorrow's best allies. And so when you keep a relationship open and the lines of communication open, you'll have much better opportunity to have influence beyond the one policy issue that you're advocating for. Finally, I just want to say that we as a community of advocates really need to do a few things that are core to success. One, we have to educate other women and girls to embrace their power. Sometimes, you know, we put power as a negative influence, a negative connotation is attached to the word, but the truth of the matter is we as women have a perspective that we bring to the table that is invaluable, and we have to embrace the power and perspective that we offer. We have to establish a mentorship pipeline. You know, I really talk about this idea that, and Kimberly Ellis from Emerge has said this beautifully, as we climb, we must lift. So as we become stronger advocates and navigate the process, we need to bring other women up with us. We need to establish a pipeline of mentors who are dedicated to helping women lead, and an umbrella of support that can help one another in those difficult times. And last, but certainly not least, we have to ask more women to become advocates, because their voice, as I've said over and over again, is absolutely essential to enacting social change. But beyond that, we have to encourage good advocates and good community stewards to run for elected office, to use the power of their experience to serve in a statewide or a local capacity. Because we know until we have more women at every level of state and local government, we won't have the type of society that we'll need to move forward.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Jessie. That was great. So just a heads up to all of our listeners, we will be having questions and answers at the end of the webinar. But if you'd like to write it down and not forget, please send it in the chat box at the bottom right of your screen. Also, we're going to be following up after the presentation with slides and materials that were discussed. So look out for that in your inbox. But next up, we have Vanessa Vela Lovelace from CDTech. Vanessa is the Director of Programs for CDTech, a community economic development and capacity building organization whose focus is building the capacity of people to make change in themselves, their communities, and in policies. She was formerly a Director of Administration for Philamark, and she has a Master's in Public Administration from the University of Southern California. Vanessa brings 13 years of experience as a nonprofit program manager in the fields of arts and culture, leadership development, racial equity, social justice, and youth and community development. Welcome, Vanessa, and why don't you take it off?
Thank you so much. It's really hard to follow up on Jessie's wonderful presentation. I agree with you 100% on all of your points. First and foremost, I want to thank you for inviting me to participate in this discussion. A little bit about me. I think, you know, fundamentally I agree with this idea that our biggest power comes from knowing our story. I wouldn't have started my work in the community had it not been for being undocumented during the time of 187 and 209. Understanding that, it was public policy that created these dynamics in my life really had me wondering, why is it that, there are systems in this world that makes me feel like I'm a bad person when I know for a fact I am not. And that really led me to a pathway of really trying to understand, why am I even here? What exactly am I here to do, and what can I do that's constructive, empowering the community? So as program director for CDTech, I've actually been here for 7 years, working with the Public Allies program and whatnot, but CDTech as a whole is a catalyst for change in South Los Angeles. We equip residents through trainings and strategies and programs that are meant to strengthen them and inform them on how they can enact the change that they're looking for. At the very bottom line of it, I think some of the points that Jessie had made around, this idea of the bottom-up understanding and establishing credibility resonates with all the work that we do. So CDTech, what we want to see is that fundamentally we want to make sure that everyone understands that nearly every single injustice we experience as a community can be associated to either a systemic injury, a positionality in terms of the privileges that we experience, and our inability to see beyond our self-interest sometimes. And these are things that we can definitely do something about. These are not intractable, issues that can't be approached. That a self-determined community can drive their own solutions. That place-based local realities really do affect the systemic reality of a social determinant, such as, high school dropout rates and whatnot. That everything is technically constructed and therefore negotiable, and that we all play a role in that construction. It's really fundamental that we acknowledge that for most of our participants, and we deal with about 200 people a year. We're looking to grow that some more. We believe that everyone can learn, and this is a popular education perspective that most of the people who want to act and participate in their community have barriers, very real barriers that prevent them from acting, but that those barriers can be overcome with support and guidance, and that everyone can affect change, but that we can choose to be part of that change. And that is a fundamental piece of acknowledging and empowering people, that you give them a choice to participate and not that you force them to, which is a fundamental difference, I believe, in regards to what community development and community organizing is really all about. That, by acknowledging that everyone has power and influence and privilege, we can do better with it. These are not scary things that we can do nothing about. These are things we can definitely look straight in the face and challenge and ask for something better, right? And we are responsible fundamentally, we as people, residents in the community, as folks who are bound to each other in our survival, we are responsible for protecting, advancing, healing, and empowering our community as a whole. So when we say, this idea of advocacy, we're talking about advocacy on all levels. We're talking about it from the self to the interpersonal to the intergroup, community, and furthermore institutions. And I appreciate actually Jessie Ryan for sharing the piece around the bill that you just had passed, because I'm actually working on implementing that here at CDTech through the community planning program. Interestingly, one of the things that we're trying to figure out is, how do we, as a program, we have 5 different programs here at CDTech, how do we empower people to create change wherever they're at, whether that's in themselves or with other people or onwards and upwards. I wanted to also share this idea of the spiral model of learning, that as you're reflecting and analyzing and practicing and doing, you're constantly iterating to that next level of action, that you're able to place yourself fundamentally in your history and the injury and understanding the hurt that you've experienced, but that in coming out of that understanding, you know exactly where to move forward, what to ask for, and how to advocate for the solutions that you're looking for. And that action and strategy and also community building is fundamental to that growing. So this actual spiral model of learning was borrowed from a website called Supporting Aboriginal Higher Learners in Australia. But this idea of the First Nations concept of Native peoples, indigenous solidarity and whatnot, is a fundamental component to what we're looking for in this concept of self-determination. That we as people, all people, are capable of identifying their own solutions in their own process and their own time. While that's important for us to understand, we also have to be able to connect that back to the opportunities to change real things in the system. So we're trying to bridge this gap between two understandings here at CDTech that I'd like to offer to everyone else. One of the final tools that I wanted to share with you is this idea of the public narrative. Something that Cesar Chavez, Martin Luther King, and Obama have in common is a similar speechwriter by Marshall Gans. He actually teaches a class in public narrative at Harvard University. The concept of public narrative is really that your greatest influence comes from your greatest power, which is, as Jessie Ryan had put, your story. You know, at some point, the most empowering stories you could ever hear come from this very, very, very simple outline. What was your challenge? What was the choice that you made, and what was the outcome? What was the change that actually occurred from that empowered step? And so it goes through a couple of different phases of the story of self, the story of us, and the story of now. And you can actually Google this, and actually Marshall Gans has a free public online class that anyone can join, streaming every semester. But fundamentally, public narrative doesn't have to be scary. It just takes practice. And we're not perfect. We don't expect anyone to be perfect, but we expect people to keep trying. And the interesting, just in closing, I wanted to share a couple of things that we're working on. And my last slide is basically a couple of really interesting activities. We've got some classes coming up. Our CPED club on campus at TradeTech is filming, or is showing a film, Inequality for All. We're having a resource fair. Basically, we're trying to take all of the action out into the community and start where the people are at and work from there. But a couple of things just to kind of close off is that, you know, the interesting problem with working with people who are already experiencing the systemic injury of being oppressed, being disenfranchised, being consistently rejected, is that the fundamental problem is that they have chosen to buy out instead of buy in. And one of the things that we were recognizing is that in community empowerment is not just the people who want to participate, it's also the people who can't participate, who have learned helplessness around being able to participate, and that we as advocates have to do better to fight for those people as well. So it's almost like, you know, bring people wherever you can get them back into the work, because regardless of whether or not they're bought in or not bought in, they'll be affected by it. So I just wanted to highlight a couple of those points around the importance of relationships, being gracious, and really staying with the people, not just, you know, go beyond them, and establishing your credibility over time with consistent integrity. That's what we need. That's what a good advocate would do. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vanessa, and my apologies for the technical difficulties. Just a reminder, we will be sending out all slides and materials after the webinar, so you can re-go through Vanessa's presentation. But moving on, our next presenter is Jessie Kim. She is the California Communications Director with Young Invincibles. Jessie graduated cum laude from Dartmouth and joined Young Invincibles with a background in email marketing, multimedia production, and health policy communications experience. Before joining Young Invincibles, Jessie oversaw the development of a mobile application that incentivized health resource use among South LA teens. Jessie has also collaborated with creative directors, illustrators, and graphic designers with publications like the New York Times, the New Yorker, and the Washington Post. She's also developed stories with reporters from NBC, CBS, Telemundo, and La Opinion. Jessie also has led a variety of social media initiatives, including a successful campaign to limit the saturation of fast food restaurants in South LA, and a trending Twitter chat moderated by members of the Congressional Tri-Caucus. As Young Invincibles' California Communication Director, she produces content for traditional and online campaigns, and builds relationships with key media outlets, and expands the reach of Young Invincibles' message throughout California and the Western United States. So thank you, Jessie, and take it away.
Thanks so much, Rihanna. As Rihanna mentioned, we work for Young Invincibles, a policy and advocacy organization representing young adults ages 18 to 35. The topic I'll be covering today is how to use the media to advance a message. As we all know, media influence is one of the most powerful economic and cultural forces today. By deciding who gets to talk and what's important enough to report, the media shapes our understanding of the world we live in and the issues we're advocating for. The problem is, women are still outnumbered by men in the media. That means that sometimes we're only using half of our talent and hearing half the story. If we want our voices and our issues to be heard, we have to learn how to effectively represent ourselves in the media. As women interested in advocacy, many of us have had an opportunity to speak to the media, will have the opportunity to speak to the media, or will be involved in prepping someone to speak to the media. Whether you or your colleague has been asked to appear in print, radio, or television, preparation is key. You want to do your research by reading key publications and doing a scan for related stories in TV and radio. Figure out what issues interest your reporter and what their angle is. Some reporters might only be interested in hearing about how your issues are nationally relevant. Some might want to tie your issue to the community they reach. Figure out who that community is so that you can be prepared with facts and stories that resonate with that audience. Think about what you're trying to accomplish. Is it gaining exposure for an issue? Is it getting people to talk about your issue? Is it getting key players to take notice? Or are you more concerned with taking a stand or acting as an expert opinion? Make sure you also limit yourself to 3 to 4 key messages and then distill that even further into one message that you hope to drive home. What is the very one thing that you want viewers to take away? Make sure that your points are concise and easy to understand. A few memorable points will have far more impact than the kitchen sink. The last thing you want to do before you head into an interview is anticipate any follow-up questions. Make sure you prepare responses to them, especially the tough ones. Storytelling is a really important part of interviewing. The very best lines don't just pop into your head. So make sure you prepare a good one, set it up in a story, and deliver it with confidence. Stories are one of our most effective tools because listeners will give you more latitude to introduce your facts and your data. They are going to trust your story even more because the fact is stories relax the audience and they charm them and they really pull you into their circle of trust. They're also a great way to talk about a complicated topic in terms that everyone can understand. A good story can be shocking, it can be funny, it can be sad, it can make the audience nod in agreement, or it can be clever because of the references you make and the language you use. The more specific you are, the more engaged the listener becomes because you'll be translating your message into a universal truth. In other words, something that they can trust. Stories create connections by reminding audiences of their own stories. And people remember stories even when they forget killer quotes or facts, so really remember to integrate this into your interview strategy. One way to approach storytelling is to use personal stories. One that I heard is from a student that's a single mom and a full-time student. She has a really powerful story about struggling to afford higher education. And because she works in a financial aid office, she also is able to share the stories of the students she works with every day. When you share a personal story, like needing to choose between school supplies for your son and supplies you need for your own education, it's easy to empathize and hard to disagree. If you don't have a personal story, try introducing a hypothetical story. You might say, imagine if you were diagnosed with diabetes and told about all the health complications you might face because of your condition. And now imagine trying to get insured and being denied because of the very condition you're trying to treat. Another effective storytelling technique is to shift perspective, to try to get people to understand another side of the story. You might say, imagine if you were the worker instead of the boss. Or if you're addressing an audience of baby boomers, you might compare what being a student today is like versus being a student a generation ago. You can also think about tying your message to what's going on right now in the listeners' lives. You could use a phrase like, you're hearing these statistics and you're thinking, or when you get into your car to get home tonight. These kinds of phrases create emphasis and immediacy. My final point is make sure you use images and emotions to paint a picture. If you're talking about the housing crisis, you might want to talk about seeing house after house with foreclosure signs in the yard. You might talk about the pride a family felt purchasing that house, and you might also talk about the disappointment that comes with losing that house. By pairing these stories with facts, you are going to make your facts much more memorable and effective. So earlier I mentioned that you really have to prepare to answer tough questions. These are a few of the difficult questions that you can anticipate in an interview. The first is a question based on a misconception or a distortion of the truth. If you get a question like this, pretend that you are correcting a friend who misheard you, and make sure to address the concern underlying that question. One misconception that I've heard is that young adults aren't enrolling in health insurance because they think they're invincible. The truth is, young people are just as likely as any other age group to sign up. They've just historically been unable to afford it. The underlying concern in this particular situation was that we wouldn't get enough young people enrolled by the end of open enrollment. We addressed this by pointing out numbers indicating that young people were indeed enrolling and bringing up an example where young people waited until the last minute to get coverage. So if you get a question that's more of a thought or a sentiment than a question, try to connect with the underlying emotion or point it back and bring it back to your message. Yes or no and either or questions can also be difficult to answer on the spot. The way to bridge these questions to your message is to use phrases that let you reframe, like only if, or not unless, or if what you mean is. So an example of this is, if someone asks you, do you think Leo will finally win an Oscar this year? You might want to reframe and say, if what you mean is, do I think Leonardo DiCaprio is a fantastic actor who deserves recognition? That's one way that you can shift it so that you are going to get your message across. If you get a question that you aren't prepared to answer, there's nothing wrong with saying, I don't know about that, but here's more about my message. If it's a question that you can't answer but should know the answer to, try to connect with the underlying concern or try to talk about something similar that you are prepared to talk about. If you get a question that's confusing because it's asking for a bunch of things at once, find the premise that needs the most attention and address it, or choose the premise that you're most prepared to talk about and bridge it to your message. You might also get an interrupting questioner. If that's the case, pause, let that person ask a new question, and then answer the new question first before returning to answer the previous question. One important part of being successful in the media is to dress for success. So here are some tips that you might want to consider when you prepare for an interview. It's important to be mindful of your attire because we want to be appropriate spokespeople for our issue, and we also don't want our clothes or accessories to distract from our message. Make sure that you wear an outfit that has a lapel for a microphone. Make sure it's simple and that you're not wearing any patterns. Solid colors look best. You can try earth or jewel tones. You definitely want to avoid patterns because they can create distracting wavy effects on screen. You also want to avoid dangling earrings or dangling necklaces. And if provided with a makeup artist, make sure you allow for 30 extra minutes when arriving at the studio. If you have to do your own makeup, keep in mind that HDTV magnifies imperfections. So focus on knocking down shine with powder and foundation, and use hairspray to control any flyaway hair that you might not see in normal light. So after the interview, the interviewer might ask you, do you have anything else to add? Resist the urge to say no. These last moments are a powerful opportunity to reiterate your message. After an interview, make sure you thank the reporter and offer them any additional information that they ask for, as well as your availability for future opportunities. Make sure you exchange contact information, and when you get back to your office later that day, write a thank you note. This is a great time to offer a hook for your next appearance. Another important thing is to evaluate your performance after an interview. Make sure you take the time to watch the clip and think about how you did. It's been said that women have a harder time watching themselves on camera, but just try to remember that this isn't a time for self-criticism, it's a time for growth and development. As women advocates, sometimes we have to be the voice for an issue or a community. We owe it to the work that we do and the people we serve to continually improve ourselves and our capacity to do good. And with that, I'd like to open it up for any questions.
All right, a huge thank you to Jessie, well, both of our Jessies and Vanessa. You all did a great job, and I think we all learned a ton of great information. So we have just a few minutes here left for questions. So if you have a question for any of our panelists, please type it into your chat box at the bottom right corner of your screen. And just a reminder that we will be following up with all slides and information provided in today's webinar. So don't worry if you missed any of that. So one question that we have, I believe for Vanessa, is where can they find the information that you talked about from Marshall Gans?
You know, I'll email it to you all. I'll email it to the organizers, and you know, if you could like pass it out. Basically, Marshall Gans is on Harvard. It's Harvard's like online system. So I could just Google it. I would do the same thing, and that's pretty much where you could find it. You can also find it at the New Organizing Institute. They're an organization that actually came out of Organizers for America, and they go around the country providing free to some cost like trainings around public narrative. If that makes any sense.
Great, thanks, Vanessa. And if anybody else has another question, please feel free to pop it in the chat box.
One question that I have, and this is Jessie from Young Invincibles, and this is something that I'd like to direct to Jessie Ryan and to Vanessa, is can you talk more about the importance it is of women having to speak up and speak up for the issues that are important to them?
Sure. This is Jessie Ryan. I'll go ahead and start. You know, one of the things that consistently frustrates me, whether it's going into a city council meeting, a board of supervisors meeting, or a legislative hearing, is that quite often you'll have paid advocates or lobbyists representing women's voice or interests, and they're men, you know, saying that they speak for women's issues, or their clients who have a knowledge of what women will need or want in whatever policy matter that's being debated. And frankly, I find that to be really disingenuous. So having fair representation at every level is obviously important, but also making sure that we're training and lifting other women up so that they have the opportunities to be before power and decision makers, so that they're sharing their absolutely unique and critical perspective firsthand. And you know, a lot of the time that takes courage, and that takes a willingness to make yourself vulnerable in a way that can be uncomfortable. But frankly, I have seen time and time again, once you get a woman who is a volunteer, a community leader, a parent, and put them in front of a city council member and share with them the power of their story, or get them to share the power of their story, they end up becoming so energized by the experience that quite often they then will never stop. They will just continue to build on those skills because they see the spark that it ignites in others in the room, the interest that it creates, and often the change that results. Because once you've heard a woman tell their authentic story and how that yields a need for change, it's very difficult to pretend you don't understand the issue.
This is Vanessa. You know, I think that's an interesting question. It's like the importance of women getting involved. I think we have no choice. We have to be involved. These are most of the things that happen out in the world will affect us one way or the other. I am actually an introvert, and I joke with my friends around like how is it that I found myself in extroverts kind of like environment, advocating and being part of you know, systemic change. Or even, you know, neighborhood change at some point requires you to be outside of yourself. You know, and you know, the interesting thing about the importance of women being involved is not unlike any reason why a man should be involved. At the end of the day, we are absolutely qualified to speak on all of our issues, whether or not it's something that affects us or someone we care about. And because we have the ability to speak on these things, you know, I think one of the one of the things that folks don't usually acknowledge about the power of a woman, and I can't say this is necessarily backed by research, is that our power is much greater than just being aggressive. You know, we have many different approaches to accomplishing what we need to accomplish. And at the end of the day, that makes us far more impactful in our ability to move something forward. Just like Jessie has said, like, this is much greater than just being authentic. This is also, you know, providing you know, care and nurturing and guidance and you know, ways and approaches that you don't usually always get, you know. I hope that answers your question.
Well, and I have to say, you know, women sometimes when they're first out of the gate doing advocacy feel embarrassed if they get a bit emotional when they're talking about the subject matter. And, you know, I know there's a stereotype associated with women being emotional when they lead or when they do advocacy. But the truth of the matter is that can be incredibly powerful. You know, attributing the way we feel with sound research and an argument for why change is needed is impactful. It can have resonance. And so, you know, really also recognizing that it's okay to allow your emotion to play a piece of the argument that you're making. And frankly, that perspective is so important. You know, we have to humanize every issue we're talking about while still making a case through data and research why change is necessary. It's a combination of all of these things that helps us get to where we need to be.
Thank you so much, ladies. And we just got an influx of questions. I know we only have 1 minute, so I'll ask one, and then for the others to ask questions, I'll send them off to our panelists and have them follow up with you individually. One question that I have is for Vanessa. She says, I would like to thank Vanessa for sharing her story of being a non-traditional student. It resonates with my own story. And I would like to ask how one can begin to get involved in their community.
By asking questions and just being present. I think, you know, we have a lot of folks who come through our process who have either a lot of experience or very, very little experience. And they both have to start from the same place, which is basically being responsive, responsible, and have these great solutions. But fundamentally, who are your solutions for if the folks don't believe that you have anything much greater than your solutions to offer, right? So I'm not sure, I'm hoping that kind of addresses the question directly, but I'm not kind of a very linear person in regards to that kind of a concept, you know. At the end of the day, just listen, learn, and earn your keep.
Great, thank you, Vanessa. And I just got a bunch more questions. I just want to let everybody know that we will be following up with the panelists afterwards and be giving them your questions. But just one more. Feel free to hop off if you have somewhere else to be. Just one more that I think is a good question to close on is how do you pick yourself up after having a learning moment, so to say, from your advocacy? So what are some tactics for keeping up your spirits when you have a loss or a setback?
Oh, that is such a great question. I don't know who asked it, but perfect question. So I will tell you, you know, there are a lot of losses. I think for every win, there are probably, you know, 100 maybe small losses along the way to get there. And so you have to, in my opinion, develop a support network of like-minded individuals who will be your champions in those really dark hours. You know, one of the big challenges of the work I do is often I am navigating the shark-infested waters of Sacramento politics. You know, people who have much more influence and money are working to influence and inform the process. And I have had to look for other women who are breaking through a traditionally male environment, who are also experiencing the same blows, who can sit down with me when I'm having a moment of darkness and talk about why the work I do matters, give me a pep talk, you know, strategize how we can do things differently moving forward. It's really finding that community of support with other women that gives me the courage to go on and do the work I do from day to day. And I would also say really finding the space for reflection. I think in society we are so bombarded with, you know, multiple different social media mechanisms and really this strain for time And we as women often have so many different roles that we're taking on at any given time and space. But to really allow yourself, maybe it's even just 5 minutes a day of journaling or reflection. I actually carry around a little book of big ideas, and also sometimes I'll write down, those issues that I'm holding close to my heart, that I'm beating myself up over, because sometimes just writing that down helps that dismiss that power, throw that away, and then focus on the good moving forward. And I really think that that reflection is key to success.
I'd like to jump on that one too. I agree with you completely on that. I think the importance of having people who not just understand who you are, but where you're going, and will keep you accountable in a nurturing way that kind of keeps you moving forward, and not just kind of beats you up over something, is really important. There's this belief that being critically self-reflective is important, but the critical part should not kind of overshadow the reflective part. Like, I find a lot of folks kind of coming into the community being very clear. I know exactly why something is not working, but may not necessarily have as much energy for how things can work. And I think it's fundamental. It's like keeping the people around you who can help you understand not just what's not working, but also how it can be better, right? They're your true champions.
I definitely agree with everything that Vanessa and Jessie just said. One thing to add as far as media is practice, practice, practice. Every time that you trip and fall is another opportunity to get up and learn how to do it better again. Remember that everybody makes mistakes and everybody has had that learning moment. So I would reiterate that, and remember that the support of your peers is there, and remember that you are a voice for your issue. And it's not about you, it's about the issues that you're advocating for. And on that note, I'd like to thank everybody for coming. It's 1:05, so thank you so much for staying on the line, and thank you again for joining us, Jessie and Vanessa.
Thank you. Everyone have a great day.
You're welcome. Thank you so much. Have a great afternoon, and go out there and change the world.